If you're an elite athlete, you shouldn't be tight when you're running. You should glide along gracefully. My objective was to kind of shake things up a little bit, which I think we did. Don't be frightened to push yourself outside your comfort zone, and that is a big thing with me.
Right.
It worked really well for me. I think it's a great honor for me to be an Olympian, and I'll always be an Olympian, and I carry the mantle of responsibility of being an Olympian through into lots of different things in my life.
Rod, welcome to the Job to Journey podcast. Great to have you on here today.
Hi, Peter. I'm very happy to support you in your new podcast and look forward to chatting about this.
Just for everybody, we're going to go through this in a bit more detail, but in summary, Rod went from elite athlete to running his own financial advisory investment management program over the course of his whole career. And we're just going to explore a little bit of Rod's journey and talk about some of his key decisions and how he went about them and some of the ups and downs along his journey. Where I thought I might like to start, actually, which is not in chronological order, is at university or prior to university, you realized you were a pretty good athlete, and that led you to really focusing it on university. What triggered you really taking athletics seriously at the age of 18 or whenever you head off to university to think, actually, I'm quite good at this. I think I'm going to give it a go in terms of operating at an elite level?
I suppose like a lot of athletes, it starts off at school, maybe even prep school. I found that I had a gift, and that was evident in the fact that every time I ran races I would win, and sometimes by quite a big margin. And then when I was at senior school, I took part in all the athletics programs during the summer with no training, because the schools then didn't have training and we were running on grass, running tracks. There was no synthetic tracks. I went to school, boarding school up in the north of Scotland, so trying to get access to sports facilities was quite difficult. And I would win the 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters, long jump, all the sprint events I would win and set school records and win Victor Ladorum Cups and all that sort of stuff. And then when I left school, around about the time I started at uni, I joined a local running track down in Guildford and started to see how my running would progress if I had proper training. In fact, I remember thinking at the time, I was really into rugby, so I loved my rugby, and I had to make a decision, really. Did I want to join a rugby club and do that, or should I go and join the running club and try my hand at running? Because I knew I couldn't really do both, because if I did rugby, I'd be subject to injuries and stuff like that, and then I probably wouldn't be able to fulfill whatever potential I might have on the running side. So I thought, right, I'll do the running first and then see how that goes, and I can always come back to the rugby later. And that's exactly what I did. I joined this running club and progressed through that, kept on winning most of my races, which is really good. And then I was picked out by the Surrey coaching team for the Surrey counties, and taken on invited to go on special training. And cut long story short, after winning quite a few significant races, I was selected for the Olympic Games in mid 1980.
It's interesting you mentioned being an elite athlete, because I think it's just a level that, I mean, I've never competed. I'm sort of third 11 hockey sort of standard, or second 11. And but my little story about this was my son was at a junior school where Roger Black's children went a couple of years.
I know Roger. I know Roger.
Yeah. So and at each year there was this sort of 50-yard dash that the parents would get very worked up about, and some people turned up with spikes to run. You got men and women in shorts and skirts and bare feet, and people wearing spikes. And Roger Black's there, and they're saying, Roger, you've got to run in this race. He's like, no, I don't want to run, blah, 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 blah. And they persuaded him to. He strolled down this 50-yard course, like almost in slow motion, and he won by 10 yards. I mean, he didn't even look like he was trying in any way, shape or form. And I think that's what, it really brought home to me, that's what an elite athlete can do. It's just a level above club athlete. And so, you know, for you to get to Olympic standard, I mean, that must have been a moment of pride and you know, accomplishment that you must have felt at that point.
Yes, well, it was. But I would say all all athletes who reach, as you say, elite level were club athletes originally.
Yeah.
So you don't just go from leaving school and become an elite athlete. There's a lot that happens kind of in between. And that's part of your training focuses on technique, stride length, cadence, sort of stamina training, all those sort of things, so that when you do end up as inverted commas an elite athlete and you're running for your country and you're on television, it looks as if you're gliding along and it's quite easy. But I suppose we'll come on to talking about business and
Yeah, sure.
all that sort of side, and there are a lot of links between that, the sort of training and the hard slog that you go through as an athlete that makes you look like an elite athlete, and your running looks as if it comes so easy and so effortless, because it should. I mean, if you're an elite athlete, you shouldn't be tight when you're running. You should glide along gracefully.
Yeah.
You should, you know.
So, I mean, a couple of things maybe you can give us some reflections on. One, if there's any, I think, you went to the Moscow Olympics.
Yeah.
You ran in the 4x400 meter final.
Yeah.
So I've got two questions. One, if you'd like to maybe talk a little bit about that experience, what that was like, and how that felt to sort of represent your country and at the highest level.
Well, I was lucky enough to represent GB quite a few times during the course of that year and the year before. And of course, the pinnacle was being selected for the games and going to Moscow and competing in the heats. And I think we actually won the heats or came second against all odds, because the competition was very hot.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know if you remember, but it was such a long time ago now, but the 1980 Olympics, it was a time when Russia had invaded Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And a lot of countries, including the US, actually boycotted the games. So we didn't have the full, what I would call a full Olympic experience, because Great Britain didn't boycott the games, but the authorities said to us that we're going to send you out just for your event, and then you're back home pretty much straight away afterwards. You're not going out there for the full month of the games. So the 4x4 was, pretty much the last track event. So we went out about 3 or 4 days before the event to get ready, and then a couple of days later, we came straight back. So, but that didn't. I mean, for me and the rest of us, I think that we're selected. The fact that you're selected and you're actually running and representing your country at that high level was compensation enough for not, going out for the full month.
Yeah. And I think you talked about elite athletes, but some of your peers were the elite of the elite. So just from a UK perspective, Sebastian Coe, Steve Ovett, Daley Thompson. I mean, maybe we're biased as UK citizens, but these are all-time greats. They're not just at their time.
Yes.
I mean,
yes, well, forget.
What was it like? Did you get to meet them and hang out with them? And any observations about, were they on a different kind of mindset, even to yours, in terms of operating, to be all-time champions?
Yes, well, don't forget Alan Wells as well. He's I think he still lives in or around Guildford, so he's fairly local. Alan won the gold from 100 meters gold medal, and I think he got second in the 200. And Yvette and Co we kind of know about. We've got gold and silvers there. Daley Thompson did extremely well. So, to comment on that, athletes tend to socialize with your own event.
Right.
So all the training camps and all the events when you were room sharing with other athletes were all the 400 meter group. So although we kind of knew the other athletes, we weren't sort of mates with them, and you wouldn't hang out in that sense with them. And I also, what usually tend to happen is that the top elite athletes, if you want to call them that, the Seb Coe, Steve Ovett, and the others, sometimes I believe they didn't even stay in the same sort of group accommodation as us. They would have their own hotel and have their own way of preparing, because the stress levels on them with the press and everything else were extreme,
So we'll get to some kind of chronological order soon, Rod. But you were doing this. You left university and you were working for a company at this point. And how do you think that shaped your particular path as opposed to an athlete of, you would be sponsored by Sports England, you'd be in a way have a salary, and then you'd retire from athletics. How do you think that requirement to actually work at a full-time job and train as a international athlete, how shaped your path? And do you benefit, or do you wish you dream of a salaried athletics job that they have today?
Well, back around 1980, it was just beginning to go professional. So I spent my first 10 years. My first job was for 10 years with a big insurance company. Um, it's now called Aviva, and basically, one of the reasons why I decided once I finished university to start work there was because we had a family friend who worked there, and they got me an interview. It was a bit easier than it is now to get your first job. I wanted to work there because they were very big in sponsoring Wimbledon tennis. So I knew that they were pro athletes, if you want to call them that as a general expression. And as my running career sort of progressed, they did sponsor me. So they put money in those days, basically what would happen is your sponsor would put money into a trust account controlled by the British Athletics Board. And then when I wanted to use the money to draw down funds to pay for training trips and stuff like that, I would then submit a request and they would send me the money, and that's how it worked. But I mean, appearance money was beginning to start happening and everything. And to be honest with you, it was my dream it was beyond my dream to run, to be selected and to run in the Olympic Games. And then towards the end of 1980, when that season finished, I was having a game of tennis, and I was extremely fit, of course, having just come off the track. But I'm an awful tennis player, and I did something to my back, so I trapped a nerve in my back, which I had to have 3 or 4 months bed rest, and I then had to make a decision as to whether to continue to pursue my running career or to stop that and say, well, actually, I've achieved everything beyond my dreams. That's enough. I'm going to focus on business and my work career.
Right.
And that's what I did.
Very good. Well, I was going to talk about your work career in a minute, but I think the other thing that I think would be interesting for our listeners that maybe you've shaped a little bit of how your work philosophy is. Your childhood was quite interesting. You mentioned to me that your parents were sort of living or working in the Middle East or occasionally in the USA. From your perspective, you were based out of the UK, and then you were based in the Scottish Highlands. And I think to most people, and especially people who aren't British, when you say a boarding school in the Scottish Highlands, their first reaction is probably, I saw that on The Crown and it didn't look much fun. Hopefully your experience was better, but also how did that, probably a mixture of international flying, meeting your parents, but also at one level, potentially having to grow up quite fast, being self-sufficient at a boarding school. How do you think that shaped, when you came on to running your own business? Do you think that's got a part in your path?
I think it probably has, yes. I mean, I first went to boarding school when I was 7, and I think we were living in Abu Dhabi at the time, and I stepped off the plane at Inverness Airport in shorts in the middle of winter, having never seen snow. So it was a bit of a challenge, and not something that I would want my kids to go through. Sending them away at 7 years old, it's quite tough. But it was fairly normal then, especially for expat kids, because otherwise you get dragged around and you have a different school every couple of years, and that's probably even worse for you long term. But I think what it did was it gave me a great sense of independence, because you have to be, and resilience, and I think those sort of things, when you're starting a business, you need to have those in bucket loads, really. Confidence in yourself and all the rest of it, and be independent and go for things. So I think, But I saw the world with
Yeah.
it. My parents were traveling around all over the place, so every summer holiday was in a different, almost in a different country.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to your sort of work life, but I think we sort of set the scene as to some of the things that might have shaped how you went about your career. But again, the other thing that was interesting, I think I phoned you up a couple of weeks ago to say, hey, Rod, would you like to be on my podcast? You say, well, Peter, I'd love to hear more, but I got to dash. I've got to go to the office and give up my badge and my laptop because I'm out of my probably, my corporate job. And ultimately, we'll talk about it a bit, but was almost handing back a 40-year journey. That's almost
Yes.
that final paragraph of the 40-year journey. So it's a great time to have this conversation. But the one thing I wanted to start from back at the beginning of this journey is I would say probably at a relatively young age, or you said, you know what, I'm going to start my own financial advisory company or investment management company. What just triggered you that, I don't want to be just part of a big company. I'm going to strike out on my own and take on that journey of starting my own business. What do you think triggered that, and what part of your sort of personality thought that's the path I want to tread?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I started off my career, I spent 10 years working for what's effectively Aviva.
Yeah.
And I got a good grounding there and good foundations in the sort of industry. And towards the end of that 10-year period, in fact, I left virtually on the day 10 years later. And I was approached by one of my clients who ran a business, and they kept on asking me to come and join them, and I kept on deferring it, thinking I'm not sure I'm ready to do that yet. And I think what really made me, after careful thought, do it was sort of mantra that one of my running coaches used to say to me right back in the beginning when I was doing my running. He sat me down and he said, right, we're going to start training now. And this is the training program you're going to have when we're aiming for the Olympics next year. And of course, I'd never really thought I was anyway near good enough for that. And he said, if you, it's better to try and fail than not try.
Yeah.
So that's carried me through my business career as well as my running career. And then because I was doing quite a cushy job with this big insurance company, and it could have been a job for life and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, actually, I don't think that's for me, being this big company corporate sort of person. I quite like the idea of being in charge of my own destiny. And if I don't try it, if I try it and fail because I'm not good enough, then at least I know where my own limitations are. Okay. And the chances are that it will succeed because I want it to succeed. So that's really why it happened.
And did you start with, a couple of other partners, or you went to work for this person, but you were an independent branch? And where did you start? What part? I mean, presumably you didn't have the portfolio that you have today, or ended your own company with. What did you start with from a kind of, which services were you offering?
Right. Well, in the beginning, I was asked to come in to run an insurance broking division for this company from scratch. And they have some clients, and most of those clients were given to me at Aviva. So I kind of knew what was there. So I said, eventually, I said, look, I will come and join you, but we've got to set a separate company up, and you've got to put me in charge of that so I can be autonomous. Okay. And basically that's what happened. And I started to run that separate company, was part of a larger group. And then in time, I became a shareholder in the larger group, a minority shareholder. And then as time went on, over a few years, the group got into a little bit of hot water, because it was a money lending, commercial insurance, commercial mortgage broking business. And basically, some of the debts, the money that was being lent, they started to have bad debts. And we had a VC partner, venture capital partner, involved at the top in the group company, and they wanted out, basically. So the commercial mortgage broking and money lending side was gradually wound down and shut. And then that left the insurance broking bit that nobody had paid too much attention to. It was being run by me, and I had about 3 or 4 staff at that point, or something like that. So I did a management buyout. So I bought the business from the venture capital partners, and I think they did me a very good deal.
Right,
So
good.
I bought the business, and I think the proceeds that I paid for the business came back to me via dividends over the next following couple of years.
Right.
So it was a sweet deal for me and for them, because they'd written off the whole investment anyway. So that gave me the impetus to effectively be completely on my own. So then I then sort of grew the business from there. I had a sleeping partner, which was the group non-exec chairman. Him and I became quite good friends. In fact, we're still friends now. So him and I were shareholders. We both jointly bought the business out to the VCs, and then the next step was we were doing insurance broking and financial advisory work, and we found that the insurance broking side and the financial advisory side, although it was all sitting together in the same office, there were different mentalities in terms of the people and the way work was done and everything. And there were repeated clashes over culture and things like that. So I decided what we had to do is demerge the business into two. So we split them up.
Yeah.
Okay. And then 2 years later, 2 years really for tax reasons, we sold off. I say we, the non-exec chairman and I, sold off the insurance broking business to what is now quite a large insurance broking group based in the city. So we sold that off with the staff. All the staff went over. That transaction happened very easily, quite quickly, and everyone was happy. So that allowed me to focus purely on the financial advisory and the investment management side of the business.
So I don't know. I mean, I think financial advisory has been through sort of many twists and turns in the last, few decades. And I'm not quite sure where it sits on the scale of estate agents, secondhand car dealers, sort of being unfair to many ethical people. But what did you think you needed to do differently that said, well, I want to be respected as a set of as a financial advisor, as a financial advisory company, and what do I need to do differently from the norm? And I'm probably being very unfair to a whole range of people.
Yeah.
What did you feel you had to do differently to stand out and attract the people you wanted to think, well, I trust Rod and his company with my future?
Yeah, well, I guess one thing that I've carried into my work and personal life is this mantle of being an Olympian. I don't generally talk about it an awful lot, even though our marketing people say, well, you ought to put this in and put this on here and put this on there. And I've always kind of shied away from shouting too much about it. But from a point of view of my personal ethos, I think it's a great honor for me to be an Olympian, and I'll always be an Olympian. And I carry the mantle of responsibility of being an Olympian through into lots of different things in my life. So my career is interesting because I feel that responsibility to, and it comes through, I hope, in terms of to provide a very high level of service, to be very ethical, to do things in the right way, to get the right people to support all those things that will make or should make a business successful.
Yeah. And how did you grow the business? I mean, this is way before it's before the internet, it's before social media. You probably didn't want to spend a fortune on advertising because that's straight off the bottom line. Were you relying on word of mouth and reputation and networking? Was that generally the way you grew the business to start?
Yeah, so it was in the beginning. We did used to advertise in Yellow Pages.
Oh,
Do you remember
goodness.
Yellow Pages? Yeah, that's a long time ago. But we did used to do. I was a great believer in marketing and advertising, and we used to do a fair amount of it. I mean, it used to be expensive, as you say. It comes off the bottom line, and you've got to think hard about it. And I know that when you advertise, you can't put out one ad and expect to get loads of business. You've got to commit to it, and you get nothing for a while. And then gradually, if you do it properly, the returns come later. So basically, in 2005, we acquired another business and moved the business down into Guildford.
Right.
And at the same time, I bought out my sleeping partner, the non-exec chairman of the holding company originally. So I bought him out and then bought this other business, and I took on some other shareholders. but we were all involved in running the business, which was really positive. Um, and we took on a PR company actually at that time to really get our name out there, to really promote us. That was quite expensive, but it really, really paid off.
Right.
So one of the big things that we wanted to do was to get involved in working in partnership with all the local law firms in Surrey, and this PR firm helped us do that fairly quickly. So we ended up sponsoring the Surrey Law Society and doing lots of other large events. And I think we'd been in Guildford for about 2 years, and one of the senior partners of a very large law firm said, "Well, you're obviously the go-to financial firm in Guildford, aren't you?" And of course, we weren't really, but the PR made it look as if we were. So that was working quite well. So I do believe in marketing, not necessarily advertising, because that's expensive and
Yeah.
it's a bit hit and miss in my opinion. But using the money that you might have spent on advertising on PR, doing editorials, getting involved in discussion pieces, because generally editorials in magazines, newspapers doesn't cost anything, like an ad does. So I would really focus more on that, and then just trying to be positioning ourselves a little bit differently. I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to make it better.
Yeah.
So looking around at what our competitors were doing, we didn't feel at the time that there was much in the way of competition. Competition was a bit sleepy, been there for ages, and my objective was to kind of shake things up a little bit, which I think we did. Certainly looking at this, how the business grew between 2005 to about 2020, when we put the business up for sale, there was a significant jump. I think we had about 10 staff in 2005 when we bought and merged in with this other company. And when we ended up selling the business, we had about 35, 36 staff. It's not all about staff numbers, it's about profit, but it gives you some sort of measure.
I think the other thing I was going to ask you about, because I know that sense of personal responsibility and ownership. I mean, correct me if I'm butchering the trade or the area, but presumably it's one thing to give financial advice in general. It's another thing to say, right, we're going to have an investment pot and we're going to have a committee and we're actually pick shares and bundle it. At what point did you feel, one, I feel I can offer an even better service by doing this personally, or as part of the company?
Yeah.
I'm prepared to take that risk because I know, probably you were personally liable as well as the company liability. What gave you the confidence to say, do you know what, I think it's going to be worth it, that if we go into investment management, I feel I can offer a good service to people?
Right. Well, that's interesting, because that around about that time, because we bought this other business, merged it together in the end of 2005, and then in 2007 the credit crunch hit.
Yeah.
So that affected all financial firms, and there were a lot of smaller financial advisory firms, or even larger ones, that weren't structured well, that went to the wall. And it was a really scary time for everyone, not just the financial services industry, although that's the area that was particularly acute. It's when Lehman Brothers went under and all the rest of it. So I took the attitude that, look, we've got a really good sound business. We're structured pretty soundly. We could have been structured better with holding more cash, but no one expected the credit crunch to hit in the way it did. So I think we trimmed back the staff. By that point, we had about 15 staff, and I think we let one person go just to trim the sales a little bit.
Right.
And then we made the decision basically to try and keep the shape of the business and not let loads of people go, because this will turn around at some point, and then everyone is going to be scrambling to restaff, and that's going to be quite difficult. So we sort of hunkered down, and then we went to the bank and said, could we have a facility? I think it was, at the time, it was a couple of £100,000 facility, so that we could develop what became our in-house investment proposition. So the idea was that we would use those funds to develop, whilst the market was in the doldrums and there wasn't much new business being done during the credit crunch period. So we thought, right, we'll spend that time refining the investment service that we have. So basically what we did in a nutshell was we doubled the fees we were charging clients. We halved the admin,
Right.
and we, instead of reviewing clients' portfolios once a year, we were reviewing the clients' portfolios about 5 or 6 times a year, and that resulted in that, in theory, that would result in additional performance for clients that would more than outweigh the increase in the fees that we were charging. So I did the business plan, and it looked so good that I didn't really believe it, and I had to cut the numbers back. And then I sold it to my colleagues on the board, and we launched it end of 2009, and clients absolutely loved it. They didn't mind paying the extra fee because they could see what they were going to get for that, and we delivered. Basically, we grew that from nothing in 2009 when we launched it to when we sold the business. It was about $500 million.
Wow.
But funds under management that we were running.
And this is quite, I mean, whether you call it a contentious topic or it's debated a lot, and I'm sure you know, EFTs publicise obviously they publicise their return on investment, but that is what they also lead with. Our fees are whatever, and that's one of the leading marketing points of, you know, the big companies doing that. And as you said, you were competing against that, but presumably your personal service and that going the extra review point, you know, the business case hopefully added up for the investors who chose to go with you guys, basically.
Yes, well, the fees that were increased were our financial advisory and investment management fees, not the fund fees. So we still had clients would pay. Typically, this is the way it works. Clients would pay us a financial advisory fee. There would be an investment management fee for managing the money day to day, and then there'd be fees attaching to whatever funds you were invested in, if you were indeed invested in funds. So it was a financial advisory fee bit that we increased, and we gave a much better service as a result, and that resulted in better returns. And we didn't want to go down the route of fighting with competitors on see who can reduce the fees the lowest, because at the end of the day, what the client is interested in is performance net of fees.
Yeah.
So we focused on performance net of fees, and if our fees were slightly higher, but the net result was we outperformed by 2, 3, 4% a year, then clients wouldn't mind paying the fee.
And you've been in business, you know, say 15, 20 odd years by then. How did you go about, you know, you very much got this Olympic ethos, but you almost need a football team on the investment committee. You need a goalie and a striker and a midfielder. You had those balance of opinions before you decide what to do. How did you go about picking the right individuals on the right diversity of opinions to create what you felt would help with those investment returns?
Well, we prior to the merger and acquisition of this business in 2005, we had amongst the team a couple of really good senior people that you know, we pushed on in the business and everything. What I didn't want to have happen was the business to be too dependent on one or two people, because around about 2005, 2006, the grand plan was ultimately, if it was going to be in 10 years' time or 15 years' time, the grand plan was to build the business into a size of and of a scale that we would be attractive enough for a big investment bank to come and buy us.
Right.
And that was always the plan. We weren't into having detailed business plans that are an inch thick that you read once and it sits gathering dust in your bottom drawer. This was like a sort of bullet point grand plan, which you know, we kept on coming back and reminding ourselves, why are we doing this? Well, this is why. You know, setting up our own investment proposition was a big step in that direction.
Yeah.
If we wind the clock forward to 2019, 2020, when we put the business up for sale, we ended up selling. In fact, one of the first offer we had was from a big investment bank, and we ended up selling to one of the largest UK financial advisory firms, you know, in 2021.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So and you know, whether this has ever been a job for you, probably not really, Rob. But are you enjoying it? Did you think this was enjoyable? Quite a lot of pressure? You know, you got people's future. Did you ever just actually, I really enjoy this. Was that generally your attitude on a day-to-day basis?
Well, in the early days, and this was up until about 2006,
Yeah.
in the early days, I have to say I didn't,
Oh, right.
because there was constant change with regulatory things. We had a small business. I would have to be involved in all the financials, which I love actually, but the responsibility of looking after the financials with my what was then a credit controller, accounts assistant, the marketing, the staff. I was doing everything and kind of being run ragged.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that I think this applies to everyone. There are certain things in business that you're really good at, or should be good at, if you're running your own business. Certain things that you are really good at, and funny enough, they're the things you really enjoy. And there are certain things you're not good at, and usually you don't enjoy those. So if you're in a small business, you haven't got the luxury of just dealing with the things you're good at that you enjoy. Okay. So when we merged with this other firm in 2005, the MD of that firm, him and I were friends leading up to the merger, the acquisition, the merger. But we did we were we had complementary skills. So he was good at the things that I wasn't good at and didn't enjoy,
Yeah.
and he wasn't good at the things that I liked. So basically, one of the first things we did, kind of on day one, was that we agreed in advance that he would look after those things in the business and I would look after these bits. So from that point onwards, really, plus the fact that by then we'd kind of achieved what I call critical mass.
Yeah.
Okay, we could we could loosen the purse strings a little bit and spend a bit more money on marketing, because the profits are more consistent. We had a bigger business. We had economies of scale. All those sort of things. As a small business person, you're probably always striving for, and to be honest with you, sometimes you never achieve it, and it's a struggle.
Yeah.
So I think I really started to enjoy it a lot more from about 2006 right the way through.
No,
You know,
it's interesting because I work mainly for mid-size or larger corporates, and definitely over the last few years, I think in terms of people development and then the people strategy has evolved to stop asking people to work on their weaknesses and get better at their weaknesses. It's actually more embrace your strengths and find the roles that allow you to thrive and focus on these strengths. There may be some housekeeping. You can't ignore, understanding of finance or whatever those might be, but it's a bit like, it would have been a bit silly to try and make you an international tennis player, right? It would have been, why not go for the obvious? And I think that's definitely changed in modern corporate life, that a lot more focus on playing to people's strengths rather than critiquing their weaknesses and asking them to get better at them.
yeah, I think in a small to medium sized business, which is what we were, um, if you want to push on and you've got your game plan, I mean, let's take compliance, for example. My sort of financial advisory and investment management businesses, are subject to very, very serious compliance restrictions and things you can and can't do. And you've got to get that right, because otherwise you risk everything if that goes wrong. So for many years, we would do the compliance in-house, and one of the directors who was particularly good at that sort of thing used to do that as part of his role. And then we got to the point we thought, well, actually, we're oversized now. We need our own compliance manager who knows exactly what she's doing, and we can then outsource some of the heavier lifting as well. And that then frees up this other director that was doing it to focus more on business development.
Yeah.
And that business development should pay for the additional costs of this compliance person. So I mean, playing to people's strengths is definitely something that we've worked on over the years, definitely.
Well, I've known you a few years, Rod, and I would say one of your strengths, you're very calm in all the dealings that I've had with you. And I've got to look at my notes here, because I did a quick, and this is just me, I didn't even go to the internet, but by my reckoning, in your business, you've been through Black Monday, dot-com crash, Enron, the 2008 crisis, Brexit, COVID, and Ukraine. So If you weren't calm, and there's probably more that I've missed, but if you weren't calm in a financial advisory business, an investment management business during those events, well, you'd probably be stressed out. Or
Well, I think you take the view that most clients we deal with, their funds are invested for the medium to longer
yeah,
term. So usually that means 10, 20, 30 years time. And at the end of the day, markets go up and markets go down. And you always have geopolitical pressures,
yeah,
you know. I know there's one point I was at an investment conference, and we were talking about investment strategy and stuff, and North Korea started firing rockets over Japan, and it's just like and it's just like, well, yeah, that's another geopolitical pressure that's come on, you know, and there'll be more next week, next month, in 6 months' time. So you've got to kind of look through that
yeah,
and look at the longer term picture. And the markets usually price in geopolitical stuff.
yeah,
You know, I mean, the Ukraine war started after we'd sold the business, and but you know that was on the front pages for quite a few weeks. But inevitably, it moved to page 2, page 3, and then the press almost stopped talking about
yeah.
it unless there's some unique event that happens. So things move on basically, and you need to be diversified in portfolio management, so you're not all in one area. You need to have safety elements built in, so when you do have a catastrophe, it doesn't drop too much. So the name of the game is outperforming the market,
Yeah.
really.
But it's interesting. I mean, you know, this is your profession, this is your career, and maybe the analogy is a bit like a doctor. You don't want everyone can be very stressed and emotional about their own body or their relation's body or diagnosis, but you don't want the doctor panicking or the doctor stressed out, and they can almost come across as blasé and uncaring. But I imagine you've seen the whole range of human reaction, you know, human nature reaction to all these events. I bet I imagine that your customers go from the calm to the panicky and all points in between over the course of these events. And
Yeah, I
money's an
mean,
emotive subject, right?
yeah, no, it is, and you know, we used to have debates internally about, you know, making sure that as a firm we had a joined up company policy and what our response might be to certain things, and the key for us really was communication. So when there's a big event, when the big event happens, we get an investment note out to all of our clients before the phones start ringing
Yeah, yeah.
to explain. And that usually it doesn't stop people ringing, and we're very happy that people do ring, but it cuts down on, you know, people calling because they so actually looks like they got a handle on it, and I needn't worry, I needn't call them.
Yeah, so you're more like hopefully you're more like the psychological helpline rather than the financial helpline. Is that when?
Well, sometimes it feels a bit like that. Yeah, sometimes it feels like that.
So, Rod, you know, you mentioned it a couple of times already, but you know, you only want to maybe work for a certain period of time, or you feel you've reached the natural point. You decided, you mentioned to sell, and you sold 5 years ago. Probably always the idea, you mentioned that, but how did you navigate through that? Because this is very personal to you. This is your work, this is your reputation, and it's your legacy. How did you feel sort of emotionally as well as logically about that process and making sure that, you know, you felt it was going to be handled the right?
Well, yes, we decided in I think it was 2018, 2019 that we would um, conduct an exercise to sell the business. We had our ear quite close to the market, so we knew roughly what was going on out there and what we felt the business might be worth. Um, and it was really because we knew in our industry that you don't sell the business and walk away. So you know there's an earn out period.
Yeah,
So that earn out period can be anything from 2 years to 4 years, something like that. So you know, and I and my partners were of an age we thought, well, actually, if we sell the business now, we're still going to be locked in on an earn out for another 4 years.
yeah.
So we've got to be looking beyond that to say, you know, how long do I want to leave it before I decide to actually sell the business and exit. So basically, that's why, and we thought it was an optimum time. There's a lot of consolidation going on in our industry, and we thought the timing was right. One of the best things we did actually was to use a corporate finance M&A firm to help us, and their fees were definitely worth paying,
Right.
100%.
And sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say that we had a short list of firms we felt we wanted to sell to, and they had their list as well. So we put the list together. We sort of added and subtracted a few, and then they prepared an information memorandum, which was then circulated amongst all these firms, and we had expressions of interest from about 15 different businesses, and they were all of the type of businesses that we 10 years previously we had targeted.
Right.
To say, right, when we eventually exit, this is who we want to sell, the type of business we want to sell to, and if we can get interest from like investment banks for stuff like that, then that's a real feather in our cap and really good for our clients.
And did you try and think, I mean, you've built up personal relationships with a lot of your customers. You're meeting them 4 or 5 times a year, or even 6, as you mentioned, compared to once a year. Did you sort of have a visual that if Jane or David, if they're now meeting X person as their financial advisor versus myself, I feel good about that and I feel comfortable that I've sort of handed it over? Or you used to hand over batons. I've handed over the baton in an appropriate way to somebody.
That's a good analogy. Yes, I mean, basically we finally sold the business in March 21, and then we knew we had an earn-out period that I, for example, was going to be involved, stay with the business for another 3 or 4 years. So, we started the process of introducing other investment managers and financial advisors into the mix quite early on. So basically, what would happen now? What would happen is I would introduce another investment manager, financial advisor, and we would work together side by side, probably 2 or 3 years before I finally exited, and that worked really well. And clients, I think, really appreciated that. It benefited us as shareholders because we had an earn out, and it was important that clients were settled.
Yeah.
And didn't leave. No, it worked. It worked very well all around.
Excellent. So maybe it's too early. Well, I'm going to ask the question anyway. We might have to come back and have a chat in a year's time, Rob. But you've just handed back your badge, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? I mean, you're always busy guy, committed, very high ethos of doing things well. Have you started to think what, the transition, I'm trying to think of a better word than retirement, which is, and have you thought about what transition to doing other things looks like? Or is it still too early? Are you still trying to work out, or have you had a few things up your sleeve that you're thinking about, whether they be work or personal or hobby related that you have in mind?
Well, I have thought about it, but there's been so much going on at work, even though, towards the end, client work was getting less and less because clients were handed over. But there were a number of other things that I was involved in with work. So, but yeah, it's been 2 weeks now. I haven't been working for the first time in, I don't know, 50 years or something. And it feels a bit odd. I like to be busy doing stuff. I said to myself that I would take a few months and do a bit of traveling and just not really think too much about it.
Yeah.
And it's been 2 weeks, and I'm thinking, right, I need to get stuck back into something. So I would like, and I've spoken to a few people about this. I would like to get involved and do some sort of business consultancy work in the sort of financial advisory, investment management sector, using the experience I've built up over all these years, maybe in the M&A space, because I love the cut and thrust of the sort of financial and legal stuff that goes on behind stitching a deal together, having done it a couple of times, 3 or 4 times actually. So we'll see. So maybe we'll keep in touch, and I'll keep you updated on that side.
So, I mean, I firmly believe that the concept of retirement is to some extent, I mean, some people might embrace it and say, do you know what, I'm done and I never want to, I'm just going to be off playing tennis or whatever they want to do, paint, and that's it. But I think for more and more people, it seems like they have a different vision of not working full time, right? It's not just I'm done. It's I want to blend it. I want to leverage my experience. It sounds like you see it that way.
Yeah, well, I'm into my sort of keep fit and gym and mountain biking and not so much running now, but a little bit. So I've got plenty of things to keep me busy. But I know from a business point of view, I'm gonna want to get back involved and do something, not something full time,
Yeah.
not as an employee, but to to give something, perhaps to give something back to help
Yeah.
other businesses. To get involved in businesses that haven't yet embarked on the full journey that I went on. They're at the level that my company was 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That I can help to give them the confidence in some ways. I mean, one of the big things I think that everyone suffers from, but I certainly did, was pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. Most people don't do it,
Yeah.
and business people that succeed and make a big success of themselves, and I'm not necessarily including me in this, but there's a little bit of that, is they push themselves outside their comfort zone. They've been prepared to take risks, jump into the unknown, and usually it pays off.
Yeah, no, that's been a common theme of the few people. I mean, from different industries and different walks of life, that's been a common theme
Yeah.
of the people I've talked to so far, for sure, Rod. And just maybe then a couple of questions to close that I've just generally been asking people. One, is there any advice you would give to someone who does harbour ambition of being an elite athlete, but also pursuing their professional ambition at the same time? Is there anything you would have done differently, or do you think the 2005 landscape is fundamentally different from when you did it, or do you think the same principles still apply?
I think the landscape's a little bit different because well, just let me think about that for a minute. If you're a super elite athlete, you can make millions there.
Yeah,
Whereas when I was doing it, you would certainly be able to make decent money, but it wasn't anything like it is now. But for most top athletes, their career is not going to last forever. And injuries aside, injuries can just end it. You know, early. Injuries aside, your athletic career, probably by the time you're in your sort of late, sort of early 50s, you're probably on the wane. So you've really got to make some serious money during that period, and you've got to be really, really good to do it.
yeah,
Or you need to have something else to fall back on.
yeah, for sure.
I mean, a lot of athletes use their athletic experience and their elite status to do business consulting. I mean, it's quite a common theme. There's a lot of athletes out there that have made a name for themselves and then gone into
Yes.
business consulting because the connections are pretty obvious, aren't they?
Yeah. Okay. And then one more question, Rod, and is probably, I try not to advise my son because, one, he may not listen, and two, I think, our kids have got to form their own past. But, if you were allowed to give your kids some advice, in terms of creating their own journey, is there a theme to what you say to them in terms of how they should even just think about things rather than, I'm sure you wouldn't tell them what to do.
Well, I have this. People who know me know I have this sort of beer in my bonnet a little bit about millennials, and which is that quite often they tend to flit around from job to job without sticking it out long enough. And I often lecture my kids or talk to my kids about when you get your first job. My daughter started her first job. My son's still at uni. Um, try and be a little bit different. If all your mates are moving around, they've got a new job every year, and posting on social media saying they're having such a wonderful time when the reality may well be something different. Be the person that doesn't chop and change your job. Be in the same job in 5 years' time, and you'll inevitably find that there'll be opportunities open up to you that you wouldn't have
Yeah.
if you were, the new boy or the new girl in the new job.
No. Yes.
So I think that was a big one for me. But I think just to operate outside don't be frightened to push yourself outside your comfort zone, and that is a big thing with me.
Right.
It worked really well for me, and I've used it with my team, and it's helped. I think it's helped people become more confident in themselves who've really pushed them through this. It's still something now that I struggle with,
Right.
even though I've pushed myself through my comfort zone many times in my business and athletics career. I still struggle with it. I still got to stop and think, this is a comfort zone thing. You've really got to do this. So it's hard.
Yeah. Well, Rob, maybe talking about yourself on a podcast is a mini version of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So
Well, it probably is. It is actually.
I've thoroughly enjoyed your conversation today, hearing about your journey, and looking forward to hearing more in the future about what that transition and the next part of the journey looks like. But thanks so much for sharing your path and all your lessons and your insights with us today.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and appreciate you inviting me on. I feel slightly honoured that I'm one of your guests, so thank you.
Cheers, Rod. See you soon.
All right, bye.